Boles, also known as Black Bart, was a highwayman and Civil War veteran who robbed stagecoaches in California and Oregon during the late 1800s. He was born in Norfolk County, England on 1829 AD, the third of 10 children. He was 2 years old when his large family moved to Jefferson County, New York, where his father purchased a 100-acre farm. Years later, Charles and his brothers David and James went to California in 1849 to participate in the gold rush in the Sierra Nevadas. After a few years, he returned to New York to bring along his two other brothers, David and Robert, but they unfortunately did not survive the trip. Charles remained in California before heading back east in 1854. Boles decided to stay in Decatur, Illinois, while on his way back home to New York. He married later that year to Mary Johnson. The couple would eventually have 4 children. On August 13, 1862, Charles joined the 116th Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment as a private. He rose to the ranks and was made a sergeant a year later. He was wounded at the Siege of Vicksburg, where he received a very serious injury to his right side in the early summer of 1863. After recovering, he rejoined his unit and participated in Sherman's March to the Sea in the fall of 1864. After being discharged when the Civil War ended a year later, Charles returned home for a few years and tried his hand at farming before he returned to his career as a gold miner after receiving permission from his wife to leave the family in search for gold. During one of his gold mining digs, Boles had an unpleasant encounter with some employees of Wells Fargo. They wanted to buy his mine he had in Montana, but he refused to sell, so they just bought the land surrounding the mine and cut off his water supply. Charles was forced to leave his mine and vowed to seek revenge upon the company. He wrote to his wife about this in 1871 and was planning on returning back home, but they never saw each other face to face again. Soon after writing his last letter to his wife, Boles changed his last name to Bolton and became a highwayman a few years later. He robbed his first stagecoach on July 26, 1875. During the robberies, he usually wore a bowler hat, a duster, and was armed with a shotgun and used a flour sack as a mask. He always traveled on foot due to his fear of horses. His first documented stagecoach robbery occurred in Calaveras County. He made $160 after tricking the driver into thinking he was ambushed by a group of gunmen. Besides being a gentlemanly highwayman, Charles was also known for leaving poems behind his heist. His first known poem was the stagecoach robbery that occurred on August 3, 1877. The Wells Fargo stagecoach was heading to Duncan Mills from Point Arena. The poem read, "I've labored long and hard for bread, for honor and for riches, but on my corns too long you've tread, you find here, son of bitches." Signed, Black Bart. Boles used the alias Black Bart after reading about a fictional character with the same name from a story, The Case of Summerfield, written by writer William Henry Rhodes, which was printed in the Sacramento Union. His second officially documented poem was left during a stagecoach robbery, which occurred on July 25, 1878, on the route from Quincy to Oroville, which read, "Here I lay me down to sleep, to wait the coming morrow, perhaps success, perhaps defeat, and everlasting sorrow. Let come what will, I'll try it on. My condition cannot be worse, and if there's money in that box, 'tis money in my purse." Boles robbed 28 stagecoaches during his career. His last robbery occurred on November 3, 1883 in Calaveras County, when he was wounded in a stagecoach holdup that was on the Sonoma to Milton route. He was shot by one of the guards when he fled. Boles was wounded in the hand, and he was eventually caught by a team of lawmen hired by Wells Fargo, led by James Hume, a detective who was hired by the company to solve the Black Bart case. Hume found a handkerchief near the crime scene with the initials FX07. He visited every single laundry in San Francisco and eventually traced it to Ferguson and Biggs California Laundry. One of the employees there said it belonged to a man living in a nearby boarding home. At the boarding house, they found the handkerchief's owner, who claimed to be T.Z. Spaulding, a mining engineer who was away on business coincidentally around the same time as the robberies occurred. The dapper old gentleman denied that he was a mysterious Black Bart, but after being questioned for 3 hours about his mining job and his wound, his real name and identity eventually came up when the authorities searched his boarding room and found suits that were similar to one of the robberies that the suspect wore, and a handkerchief with FX07 and a Bible in his possession that was a gift from his wife with his real name inscribed on the cover. But he insisted his name was Charles Bolton. Despite confessing to 28 stagecoach robberies eventually, Wells Fargo only wanted to press charges against him for the November 3rd robbery of the Sonora Milton coach, and he was prosecuted under his name Charles Bolton. After waiving his rights to a jury trial, he was sentenced to 6 years in San Quentin on November 17th, after pleading guilty, and began his sentence on November 21st, 1883, but due to good behavior was released on January 21st, 1888. By the time he was released, however, he was a broken man, physically and mentally. During his stay in the big house, he got in contact with his wife and wrote to her constantly. When he was released, reporters asked him if he was resuming his identity of Black Bart. He replied, "No, gentlemen, I am through with crime." A month later, after briefly returning to San Francisco, Boles was living at the Visalia House Hotel, a flop house in the city of Visalia. He was last seen at the hotel on February 28, 1888. In his last letter to his wife, he expressed the desire to simply disappear. Many rumors about Boles began to spread. Some say he went to live under an assumed name as a pharmacist in Marysville and was buried in the old cemetery. Others believe that he lived out the remaining years of his life in Knight's Landing and lies buried in an unmarked grave.